Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. This week I'm going to take you through a recap of a live painting demo I did at a local art group, and I'm going to be focusing on painting sheep and lambs in acrylic and watercolour. So the art group at Stoke Gabriel had requested that I do a demo of some spring lambs. So this was the first painting that I created, A2 mixed media paper. And I started off using a reference photo from Powderham Castle, which is near Exeter. And I used my blue watercolour marker to just do a quick line drawing of the three animals, basically. The idea being you've got the two lambs as the main focus, and then there's an adult sheep slightly off in the distance standing guard, as it were. Having done that, I blocked in a quick sky with a mixture of tinting white and cerulean blue and a touch of burnt umber. And one of the things I was keen to emphasize in this demo was the difference between interactive acrylics and conventional acrylics, because I don't know what it's like in the US or Australia, but in the UK at least, although the interactive acrylics have been around for well over a decade, I still feel they're relatively little known, and I don't think too many people are aware of how good they are. And they certainly changed the way I paint, and they've opened up a lot of creative avenues for me. And so I've become a little bit evangelical about them, to be honest. So I end up telling pretty much everybody I get the chance to how good they are. So anyway, so I blocked in this sky, and then I continued using the flat brush that I'd used for the sky to put in this simplified distant landscape. So the idea here was to emphasize how you can work wet in wet, and also how by pushing the brush against the bristles you can create really interesting textures. And then I've got little bits of red in here because I was also adding a little touch of red to the side of the brush, which was mostly coated in green, to do some automatic mixing. Having done that, the next thing I did was block in the animals, but again I used the flat brush, nice dilute and fluid paint, and I was focusing on communicating the fact that when you paint an animal, or anything really, if you follow the contours of the surface with your brush, then using the flat brush and the acrylic in a fluid way, you can create lots of little bits of micro texture, and it creates a nice sense of roughness, which is appropriate for wool or fur or hair. Then having done that, I basically added some darks with the cast shadows to create a sense of form, and then some highlights, again using the tinting white. And then as things moved on, I switched to the more opaque titanium white to add some brighter highlights, and then finally added a few little details to the face of the main animal. So this one isn't completely finished, but on the evening I felt I'd probably taken that about as far as I could without kind of starting to bore the audience, because once you get to the very detailed work, it's a lot of small brush movements. So I will finish this at a later date and certainly do more on this main animal. I probably won't do too much more to this distant one, but I'll do a little bit more to this one, I think, and I may adjust some other things as well. But that one went reasonably well, and having checked in with the audience, I sort of said, well, do you want me to finish this, lots of small brush movements and further details, or would you rather see a second demo with some watercolour? So here is painting 2. This is now a switch to Winsor & Newton watercolour paper, and I started out switching to a different reference photo, and I drew this little lamb and the adult sheep with a black Sharpie marker pen. And for those of you who saw my series of videos, the Animal Alphabet Challenge, you'll know that I've did a whole series of animal drawings with Sharpie marker pen, and then as I progressed through the alphabet, I eventually started adding some watercolour washes. So having put the Sharpie outlines down, I did a quick wash of light blue for the sky, and what I did was I just swept the wash straight across the entire drawing, ignoring the fact I had the animals, and then with a paper towel just mopped that up within the outline of the animal. And that's a nice way to create a continuous wash without creating kind of brush marks going around the animal. And then I put down some, I think I put down some highlight colors first and then some shadows, wet in wet deliberately. If I'd had more time, I probably would have let the highlights dry. But because of the, the time constraints, I thought, well, if I work wet and wet, that often produces some nice, interesting images. And you can see, not images, effects is what I meant to say. And you can see we've got some nice blending of colors, as nice cauliflowers and blooming going on as the shadow color blends into the highlights. And I actually quite like the effect of this one. I'm going to do a little bit more to this one. I'm definitely going to improve the eye there, put some eyes in on the head of this sheep, and then I may enhance the shadows further, not quite sure. But that one came out okay, I thought. So the demo was about 2 hours long, but there's about a 15 to 20 minute coffee break in the middle. So, working under a reasonable amount of time pressure, but that's the deal, that's the whole point. So I had about 10 minutes to spare after the watercolor study I just showed you. So I thought, okay, I'll do a third one. And what I do for my demos is I turn up with several pads of paper pre-taped at the edges so that I can switch between one and another, and that's a really cool thing to have as a backup if you want to do a second version, or if something goes disastrously wrong with your initial sketch, you can just switch to another piece of paper straight away without having to dig through your supplies and eat up loads of time. So with this one, what I did was no line drawing at all, and I started out just putting in patches of highlight color, again obviously working from a different reference, then wet in wet patches of mid-tone, and then some shadows, and then finally I did add some lines and a bit of background stuff. But this one is kind of cool, it's kind of quirky, I think. At the time I said I regretted putting this eye in. I'm not sure I feel that way anymore, but what I may well do is work over the top of this with some ink to just enhance and define some areas a little bit. Now, looking at this drawing with fresh eyes and comparing it to the reference, I can now see that I actually made the body too short compared to the size of the head. And the head's at the wrong angle, and there are errors if you want to look at it from a purely analytical point of view. But that's kind of not really the point of this style of painting. Here the paint has kind of dictated what's happened to a great extent. And that's part of the fun, part of the expressiveness of the painting. And I chatted with some of the members of the art group towards the end of the demo, and we were saying that in many ways this one kind of looked better before I added the background and stuff. And I tend to agree. It probably did. But nevertheless, that's what I've done. I've put the background in. So having done that and looking at it, as I say, with fresh eyes, what I think I'm going to give a go now is I'm going to take my Unipin ink marker, so it's got a 0.2 mil nib, and I'm just going to add in a few kind of bits of line work, some bits of texture, little bits of shading maybe. We'll see how it goes. But my thought is, at the moment, we'll see how well it works, I'm only going to do that for the most part on the areas where light is hitting it, and then I'm going to leave the shadows subdued as they are, as I say, for the most part. But we'll see how it goes, see what happens. And let's give it a whirl. So now that said, I don't want to do an outline drawing where there are nice gaps, but the first thing that strikes me is this ear. So I'm just going to, not copy the reference exactly, but make use of the shape that the watercolor has naturally created. And just put a little bit of a wobbly outline around that ear. And I think that's working reasonably well. So then when we come down the line of the neck, I'm just wondering about switching to a slightly thicker nib actually. Let's go to a 0.5, see what that looks like. So then the wool of the neck I can put a little bit of outline work in there, and then a few little squiggles which deliberately cross over the boundary between that light wash and the bare paper. Then we can look elsewhere and see if we can do anything else. Let's do a few of those along the back. Now, I don't want to fall into the trap of doing too much detail, because I think that's going to diminish the spontaneity of this painting. But you can see I've added a little bit of a hint of a mouth there. A little bit more detail to bring the eye to life. And then if I look at the boundaries I've got between the darkest wash, the purple, and the kind of pale yellow, there are some squiggles which have happened naturally as the watercolor has, merged. And so I can enhance those, but in addition, kind of put my own little marks in as well. And then if we head over to the rear end, there are some tangles. And again, I can pick out the edges of washes or deliberately go over the edges. Deliberately taking the outline of my drawing into the green background here as well. So I think it's good to not be too limited by conventional expectations of how a drawing or a painting is created. It's good to experiment and just, see what you can do sometimes. And although I said at the beginning I didn't want to fill in that gap, I'm kind of feeling that I do want to do that now. So let's do that with a bit of a squiggly line. And I also feel I want to go into the shadow regions as well. So that we've got some indication of an eye there. And the rest of the nose. So here's a slightly better look at the line work that I just did. And to be honest, I'm not sure that whether I've improved things or not. I quite like the squiggles along the back, and I quite like, some of the texture I've added in the body, but it's kind of moving away from that freshness that I had with the first few brush marks. So it comes back to this thing of knowing when to stop. And I think really on reflection, I perhaps should have stopped this one as discussed at the, on the evening, much earlier really. But on the whole, still happy to have done this experiment, and really enjoyed the demo. and I hope the people who came along did as well. I got some nice feedback, and it's always such a friendly group actually down at the Stoke Gabriel art group. They're really friendly bunch, and there's always quite a bit of humour, some nice humorous exchanges going on when giving the demo. So a big thank you to them for inviting me. Thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show.